Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to 24/7's webinar, HTM Insights, Longitudinal Analysis of Medical Equipment Service Contracts 2016 to 2022, sponsored by PartsSource. I'm Carrie Stevens, the editor of 24/7 and your host. I'm here with two excellent speakers, Dr. Phil Settimi, President and CEO of PartsSource, and Jay Olson, Director of MCHS Biomedical Services at Marshfield Clinic Health System in Wittenberg, Wisconsin. After the presentation, Dr. Settimi and Mr. Olson will answer as many questions as they can. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce you to today's speakers, Dr. Phil Settimi and Jay Olson.
Thanks, Carrie, very much. It's great to be here, and Jay, great to be back with you again. We're excited to share some really interesting insights. A second very large study that we completed at PartsSource in recent times that we'll go through the details of today, that's already having really profound impact in the industry. As Carrie mentioned, I'm Phil Settimi. This is my 9th year as CEO at PartsSource. I joined the company after about a decade in public medical device and healthcare IT companies, really working on connected devices, decision support systems, digital workflow platforms, and prior to that, did my medical degree and master's in biomedical engineering at University of Michigan. Jay, can you welcome the audience and provide a bit of background on yourself?
Absolutely. System Director of Biomedical Services for Marshfield Clinic Health Systems. I joined the biomed workforce around 1997. Most of my career has been in a rural healthcare setting. Over the years, I've served as a biomed technician in a few of the smaller shops where I had the opportunity to focus on dialysis, surgery, and some diagnostic imaging specialties. In 2002, I began my leadership career and had the opportunity to manage ministry dialysis services, and that, which involved into actually a system ministry biomed services. I also had the opportunity to manage a biomed system for third party, and now I'm with Marshfield Clinic overseeing the in-house system program for the past 6 years. Just a little information about Marshfield Clinic. I joined just at the end of 2016. Marshfield Clinic had about 5,700 inventory pieces of medical equipment. Today, to date, through building, mergers, and acquisitions, we're managing over 38,000 pieces of equipment with a value of about $440 million. PartSource was an amazing partner through the growth, and hopefully can share a little bit about our journey and some of the successes to our program. Thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Jay. It's great to have you here. I know the third-party and ISO experience has been an important driver of kind of your philosophy of management. Hopefully we'll have a chance to get into some of that today and really how you view running an optimum in-house program, lessons learned both from your provider and ISO experience. Jay, you probably recall, and many listeners may recall, a study that we initially produced in 2014 and then repeated with a larger sample size in 2018. And this was really our first evidence-based insights for the HTM community, specifically around parts procurement. And we won't go through all the details here today, but just in summary, we did a large observational study, as we're going to talk about here today, and identified a number of really high impact insights. First, that health systems were spending anywhere from 10 to 30% more than their best-in-class peers on medical device repair and replacement parts. They were often managing many hundreds of suppliers, often 200 to 300, but in many cases 800 to 1,000. Based on multiple time and motion studies we completed at medical centers, the average replacement part order took roughly 80 minutes between sourcing, tracking, receiving, and reconciliation. And then lastly, most health systems didn't have any quality control or surveillance tools around product defect rates. And as a result, they experienced greater downtime than best-in-class peers, really due to vendor selection and product selection. And we found those that were best-in-class were able to eliminate those additional down days, hence requiring a repeat buy, and ultimately drive better clinical uptime and patient throughput. And so through this process, ultimately we created PartsSource Pro for parts, and that program is now adopted by over 1,500 hospitals in the US. Over 5,000 hospitals bought from PartsSource.com last year. And really our goal here for that program was an average savings of 10 to 15% on biomed and imaging parts in the first year, an ability to consolidate hundreds of suppliers down to one simple procurement and vendor management process. Procurement times were reduced for many of our clients down to 60 seconds through interfaces into their CMMS and ERPs. And ultimately our proprietary decision support procurement engine, which is called Precision Procurement, has driven their quality acceptance rates on parts to 99.5%. So a lot of impact from that analysis, and it was an important starting point for us in evaluating how to create sustainable impact, both financially from a labor productivity and from a vendor management and parts quality perspective. But it was really just the tip of the iceberg. And as we began working with folks like Jay around the country, we discovered, as they well know, that equipment contracts are actually the largest single line item in an HTM department's budget, often exceeding 50% of the annual budget. In total, the US healthcare annual service contract market is $10 billion. So a huge burden on healthcare systems around the country, and a huge drain on their operating expenses each year. Jay, I'm curious, when you began looking at these expenses at your own organization, were these numbers directionally correct? And how did you even get the information together in the first place?
Absolutely. The tough part is when I came on board, most of the spend, and you'll see that in a common, in your common biomed shops, where all the medical spend is still managed in the individual departments. These numbers get buried. So, there's a couple opportunities. You can start pawing through the general ledger and start finding those opportunities. The biggest task at hand is to get that spend within your biomed department, so you can manage these contracts and start overseeing. And you actually have to have a compass before you can start traveling. You have to have these contracts underneath one location and coded properly so you can manage them. If you get between the departments, there's a clinical need. You get within the supply chain. They have another bucket of area where they're trying to manage that too, and it makes it very difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. We were encouraged by a number of customers to really explore this topic of helping them identify opportunities for better spend management without introducing more clinical risk. And we began with a small survey in early 2022, just over a dozen hospitals, just to really build our hypothesis. And we uncovered a couple of important initial observations. So first, hospitals were managing somewhere between 100 to 200 service contracts to support in-house clinical engineering programs, and substantial resources were consumed in support of that contract portfolio. The feedback that we had from the teams there was that they were spending on average up to 3 months per contract by the time that they negotiated, sourced, evaluated, got it through legal, and so on. And most of those contracts were actually relatively low dollar. Of course, there were some very large ones on the big iron, but there was a very long tail there. We also observed very wide variance of contract costs in terms, and we identified relatively little variance between different forms of service offerings, both OEM and ISO, although there were differences, and we'll go through the details around where that was noted. And then importantly, few systems actually had monitoring or surveillance tools to evaluate vendor performance, either on the quality of their work or the service logistics delivery. And as well, few of these organizations had much in the way of actuarial data to make their decisions. And so these initial data prodded us to evaluate a number of other important research questions and our hypotheses around them. So one, if we were to perform a broader observational study, could we help the industry identify opportunities for waste reduction and cost control? Were these issues generally avoidable or unavoidable, i.e. were they structural in nature, were they simply defects to the system, and there were or were not opportunities for improvement? And then lastly, what are the actual clinical, operational, and financial impact of each of these issues on the healthcare industry? And so from that, we decided to take on a much larger survey, over 100 different hospitals, inclusive of time and motion studies, and an evaluation of our own proprietary data warehouse that has been collecting contracts and contracts terms for the last 20 years, as well has been collecting hundreds of thousands of service event outcomes, and the outcome data and the contract cost and entitlement analysis collectively represented over 35 million data points in it that we evaluated. And so those were really the three different baskets of information: de-identified provider data, the time and motion studies, and the data warehouse analysis that collectively went into our study. So why don't we jump in, Jay, to some of the results that we observed and talk through those. So first, we wanted to get a sense for what the average number of contracts that providers were managing and understand a little bit about how their cost and quantity were stratified. And what we observed there on the left-hand side is, on average, hospitals were managing 146 service contracts. Interestingly, though, the vast majority of those were contracts that were under $100,000 in value. And in fact, 3/4 of the contracts at each of these hospitals were under $100,000 in value. And so this is a bit of an 80-20 problem, where a lot of the value resides in a relatively small number of contracts related to the big iron. And yet there are a huge number of contracts related to surgical tools and lighting and beds and stretchers and a host of other important movable medical equipment that are lower in dollars, but numerous in quantity. I'm curious, Jay, when you got involved at Marshfield and throughout your career, what did you find when you began to look and finally had in your possession that contract portfolio?
Yeah, careful what you look for. When I first came out of Marshfield Clinic, like I mentioned, all the medical equipment spend resided in the clinical departments. So the first task at hand was realigning all that spend under Biomed. And the other part was I had existing contracts that were point of sale, not only the gold, but the platinum, top of the line contracts. So a lot of major changes had to come into effect. First off, the spend, and then that allowed me to intercept the spend and stop the bleed. So when renewals came up, and also a chair at the capital committee, when the point of sale contracts were coming through, I could stop those at the beginning because those were coming out of our budget. So the first step is stop the bleed. And of course, no auto renewals either. Once I got that in place, it was just watching the apples fall off the tree. We put a stop to it. We'd invest in training. We'd look at a couple of different strategies, which we can get into later, with time and material, lower level contracts. We don't need the platinum contracts based off of utilization. A lot of metrics went into that. One of the harder jobs was the lower profile equipment. You mentioned the under $100,000 contracts. we had, a $10,000 contract here or there. You have these ultrasounds and the probes, and it's really easy with all these little, not little, it's still a considerable amount of money, but all these smaller contracts to cause that budget creep. You can take, and once you become a health system, we manage over 11 hospitals, so you can take 40 ultrasounds that exist within 15 departments at $15,000 each for a service contract. You can easily bury $600,000 of spend, which is in these times right now with the when you can come up with a $500,000 plus win, it certainly reflects well on your operations and how you're managing it.
Well, and as I'm sure you discovered, cost in the financial sense is really not the only cost of these contracts. Huge complexity in different start times, stop times, departmental contracts, enterprise contracts, different service entitlements or grades, as you indicated, across each of them. Squaring that circle and just figuring out what you need where is complex and takes a lot of time. And in fact, as we evaluated in this study, on average, clients were spending 100 days in total from start to stop. And as you can see on the right-hand side there, by the time you reach out to your vendors, begin to get updated quotes, you go through your contract negotiations, or perhaps interrogating a handful of different price alternatives, you're able to finally land on business terms, get that through legal review, get approvals, PO processing, documentation in your CMMS, start and stops, and so on. On average, clients and teams are spending 4 months per contract. And of course, that varies a bit for lower valued versus higher valued, but all in all, the feedback that we receive from clients is that the impact to their teams is significant. And ultimately, that's time that teams could be spending on higher value work. I'm again curious, just with the feedback here, Jay, on how you process this in your business today, how you interrogate, and frankly, just how you find the time to both collect, track down, and get all the vendor quoting completed when your time is to evaluate your service strategy.
Yeah, we'll take one of our morning calls, and I'll have the leadership. We have to meet weekly, and just to monitor the progress on contracts. And when you're talking contract negotiation at 8 weeks, sometimes that's being very kind, especially when you're trying to negotiate for a little more cost-effective solution. Sure. And then multiple vendors. We start taking in consideration. We're getting competing bids where we'll look at third party or other opportunities, or to actually analyze what it would take to bring this 100% in-house. And it's a long process, and it's consistent, and timeliness is the name of the game for monitoring this and building this.
Yeah, it's a great point. And monitoring is a topic that we covered with the survey here. And specifically, we were curious about how many of the hospitals have a monitoring or surveillance system in place to assess the performance of the vendor against stated entitlements or terms in the contract. So often we'll hear from folks, well, so-and-so is committed to respond to me in a particular period of time or be on site a particular period of time, and they take a certain degree of comfort in that. And yet when we talk about the tools to measure and monitor those entitlements, often folks are relying on really just the trust of the relationship or anecdotally what they remember, but there's very little objective data being provided by their vendor community or collected in their CMMS or other tools. Did you have a system to monitor the entitlements and performance of every one of your vendors at Marshfield, Jay?
That's a tough line, because there is a performance that we'll get from the vendors, and there is a 97% uptime guarantee but you spread that across the year, it's really not that great. You have a ED CT down on a Friday night, and that 3% stretched out with having that machine down, it gets a little awkward with our customers. You know, the vendors are in the same situation we are as far as in the in-house biomed shops. We're short-staffed, and the vendors are too. Our biomed community is short-staffed. So when we're looking at opportunities, if I'm locked in with a contract, I have to wait for that vendor to call me back. If I have other options, then we can allude to that a little more with PartsSource. I can go to vendor A, B, and C and have service there that day yet. You know, and getting into some of the service functions on that, the PM compliance, when you're locked into a 5-year point of sale commitment, the vendor can seem to stretch out their window of to complete the PM. Suddenly there's a 90-day window to complete the PM. It's almost like they make up the rules. It's been a road, and you know, we work with our vendors, but it can be a tough road with that trying to measure that uptime.
Well, and you mentioned, you know, you're in a rural community today, and again, having enough sample size and data to really assess the performance, and by performance, I mean, you know, quality, resiliency, availability, et cetera, all important metrics. Again, 92% of the survey participants did not have a system to consistently monitor service performance. We evaluated in the analysis on the slide here over 80,000 service events, both for critical repair and non-critical repair events. And you know, there's interesting outcomes that emerge here. So one, we found the differences between, you know, comparable OEMs and ISOs to be relatively narrow. And yet there were differences between both, as well as between two OEMs or two ISOs in the same area that had, you know, measurable differences in performance. And as we evaluated these data, we often wondered, how did hospitals evaluate these kinds of data without having the tools or the systems in place, or the databases of information to be able to do it from, because there are important differences in selecting your vendor base that you know, should go into these decisions that for most folks we observed were not generally available. And then you know, we moved down into another area, which again, in summary, if you're spending a lot of time in these contracts, there's many of them and a long tail. It's difficult to assess vendor performance, but you'd hope at least that you're getting to, you know, consistent and best-in-class pricing. And this was another data element that surprised us. This particular survey was on a particular C-arm, and we found 519 unique contract prices in our database for the same exact piece of equipment. And oftentimes this, we observe this phenomenon even within the same health system. So now you recognize how difficult price transparency is when your hospitals down the street don't even participate at the same level. This was a shock, as well as the range of min to max for these service contracts was a 57% difference in the minimum to maximum. And this was on solely a full service contract. So we saw, you know, apples to apples comparisons in the entitlements. And this was just one model, but we've repeated this study now in multiple different model categories, and we found identical results, which is a huge number of contract prices, which tells you that you know, hospitals out in the market are not getting consistent or best-in-class pricing. And in fact, the variance that they're observing is enormous, not just across geographies, but often within the same health system. Jay, do you have a benchmark that you're assessing against, and how do you evaluate your current basis, cost basis, against where you think you ought to run?
Yeah, it's interesting when you mention the unique contract prices. As we part of our growth with Marshfield Clinics, we did acquire a few hospitals, and along with that, we would assume the contracts or some of the service contracts in place. And it's very interesting when you get into the, your neighbors just down the road 30 miles, and the pricing differences that are even between organizations as you bring this equipment on. We do have benchmarking from our supply chain that helps. ECRA has some references for that with some of with the buying groups. We do have, within our internal volumes, as we've grown our experience with that, it does help us with price comparison and shopping around, but you're still working within a bubble with that. We tried trending. We do have trends of the run rate at time and material versus different variations of the contracts also. As your program grows and you're tracking that direct spend, it gives you at least a compass again of a reference of what it would be without that contract in place. If the other part is if there's no trends to compare, there's some equipment out there where we had a very, I don't want to get into models and makes of it, but there's a very specific piece of equipment where there is really no history, and we had no access to a third party or anybody else to do the preventive maintenance for us. There's no training or no internal option for us. We reached out to our friends at PartsSource and found a PM only solution at a huge savings. And it took, with all the running around and all the calls we were placing and looking for a different source, I called my friend Dave DeStefano over at PartsSource, and we had a solution within a day or two. It helps to expedite some of that process. We do have some good internal trending, but again, it's nice to have that PartsSource to reach out and get some surveys and benchmarking off of that.
Well, thank you. Dave's a good guy. You're not alone in this diverse approach to solving these problems. We asked survey participants their service strategy across a variety of modalities listed on the left-hand side of the page here, and their respective strategy across the top. And I feel like I should have you on a couch here, Jay, telling me about your childhood, squinting at this page, because it looks like quite an eye chart. And the size of the bubble here refers to the amount of spend, the distribution of them across the different contract types by modality. And what you observe here with a handful of sort of bookend exceptions are, folks' strategies are all over the place. They're managing much of this in-house, as you can see on the left. They're managing much of this through full service OEM agreements on the right, and almost everything in between. And I think as we evaluated this data and we reflected on the data reviewed just prior to this presentation, the pieces began to fall into place. There's not great price benchmarking data, which is why you see prices all over the place. There's not great quality and surveillance utilities out there, which is why you see a difficulty in assessing different vendor performance. You don't have great cost of service benchmarks at the modality or geographic level, and so folks' strategies in different geographies or modalities vary dramatically. Of course, some of this is a reflection of clinical labor availability and local market impact, but generally speaking, the diversity of approaches here was consistent with the diversity of observations we saw in the amount of time spent, in the amount of price variance, and the amount of quality surveillance that was available to folks across the U.S. Jay, you've done a lot of work in the third party. You've done a lot of work in in-house programs, both using third-party vendors and OEMs, both in transitioning a lot to more of an in-house model at Marshfield. What data did you find available to you at Marshfield when you got there to begin to collect and make the basis for these decisions?
There's a few things that come into play. First, administration, when you can come back with some financials with some big wins on savings, that certainly helps the situation for what you're doing with cutting contracts or renegotiating. We track our service contracts very closely and report every nickel stuck into the equipment, so we can report out our contract savings. We're forecasting probably $500,000 for next year, and these are just sunsetting contracts. This is stuff that we haven't signed on. It's just they just keep we keep on waiting for them to sunset. We also find out when we've made a bad contract choice, when we drop a contract on something as we're monitoring it. It's like, boy, the costs are associated with the run rate is exceeding what our contract choice would be. So we'll go back and renegotiate that. Again, we do reach out to PartsSource for help. One of the biggest, money aside, that's great, but the customer has to be on board with the service approach and trust what we're doing. Constant communication. If that customer is not, you got to keep the quality, the savings, the safety standards, the PM compliance, all that has to stay in front of the customer so that they buy in on getting creative with saving money. It's amazing how long a piece of equipment can be down as long as there's communications and expectations set. So yeah. It's a journey. Yep.
That's a great point. Beyond the clinical risk of different service strategies, there's obviously a cost benefit for having various, contract or non-contract strategies. We dug into the data, Jay, on a model basis here, really in some work we were doing with clients to help them understand where should they be taking risk in the organization. So not only are there various strategies to employ, in outlying clinics versus, your ER or level 1 trauma centers, et cetera, but how do these different models perform in the long run? What is the device failure history, not at the individual facility, but across the country look like? And as you can see here, what we did is we brought really a cumulative coverage years model, two different models within a modality. We assessed how many years of coverage that we had, really to provide power to the sample, and then evaluated what the full service contract cost on file that we had. We evaluated what the bottoms up T&M spend per year was for that asset, how many corrective events there were on average, as you can see in the far right column, and what really the savings were for clients when they decided to actually take full risk on these assets and have no contract coverage in place. And as you can see here, in this particular subset of models within this modality, there were dramatic savings available to folks. And so the question, I suppose, then, Jay, is, what data are folks using to make this decision? Because obviously, having access to nationwide benchmarking and proprietary data sets like this would seem hugely valuable when making service strategy decisions. How do you assess cost of service, on your assets? How does it weigh into your approach, at Marshfield?
And sorry, we're going to ad lib a little. I had to look at the average full service contract, average time and material spend, and put a third option in there is start investing in your biomeds, yeah, and having them frontline that. And yeah. And Phil, but holy cats, there's that my catchphrase for that. But your savings is incredible, and then the technicians start owning it. So we're at the point where we're looking at the time and material spend plus what the technicians can do to help bring that cost of service. I have basically 5 buckets of spend that just to keep things categorized. Cost of service is a result measurement. But the work goes into managing, your 5 buckets: parts, service contracts, purchase services, which is your time and material charges, your labor, your internal labor, and then I got my other bucket just to kind of pick everything up, and that's the all other. I have a very general rule. That's 50% rule. As contracts get cut, 50% of that savings goes back into parts, a little bit of labor, if we can't fix it, purchase services. It's a great ballpark. There's different scenarios. Sometimes you'll have a great year. Some days, some years you get hammered, but the average of it works well. You need to have the leadership support you, and you need to communicate it, and you need to keep that data in front of them. So.
Yeah, it's a great summary takeaway, and we'll summarize the results of the survey here for folks. A couple of really important conclusions and best practices, Jay, that you've highlighted. So first, folks who are managing in-house service still are managing a huge number of third-party and OEM equipment service contracts, on average about 150 of those. And yet there are important opportunities to consolidate, in particular the long tail there, from a contract management, negotiation, onboarding, offboarding, et cetera, where from dispatch to reporting to vendor management, there can be huge impact to both producing insights and saving organizations a huge amount of time. On average, folks are spending 3 to 4 months to activate and manage, and most of the contracts are relatively low dollar. Again, great opportunity for consolidation. The service contract pricing that we observed in market varies widely, and if you use evidence-based outcome data from proprietary data warehouses like we have at PartsSource, you can improve your contract costs upwards of 50%, and that's consistent, Jay, I think, with what you've observed in your own practice there at Marshfield. Most health systems do not have a standardized system for monitoring costs and quality performance of their really diverse vendor base. And this is key if you want to truly understand optimum service strategy. Where should you take risk? Where shouldn't you? If you are taking on some of that responsibility, what's the right respective service strategy, both across health systems as well as at an asset level? And how do you do that most cost effectively without introducing clinical risk, by having the right data about how those vendors perform in your geography to be able to make the right in-house or partnership conversations. And using a diverse supply base does not correlate really with significant introduction of clinical risk. We saw ISOs and OEMs performing both at the same levels as well as different levels from one another. The key is having knowledge of how they're specifically performing in your geography. You've mentioned, Jay, as well, I think some best practices not on this list with respect to communication. I know that we've been working with you now at Marshfield here for the last 18 or so months on this program. Any other takeaways before we jump into some of the financial outcomes and other technology benefits that you're taking advantage of?
Sure. A couple points to it is don't bite off more than you can chew. What's the how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? Your first contract you shouldn't be looking at is going down to your ED and taking on that CT, because you're nibble away at it. There's a lot of pieces, your low risk equipment that you can get on. It comes down to your team realizing the value they're bringing towards the program. Get them on board, listen and empower and trust them, and then make sure your leadership sees what you're doing. 6 years ago, when I came on board, the original shop was still using paper requests, PO requests for each part order. And we walked in and said there has to be a better way. We found a better way with PartsSource. The contracts and everything else, base one, we started out with ordering parts and having those parts imported right into our program. I can look I trust the program now. I can look and see exactly what we have stuck into a piece of equipment, the cost of service for that, and I trust the numbers. The program, we brought it to where we were, I consider humming right along with ordering parts. Then we expanded into some of the services. Now we're looking and expanding further with our service contracts and a couple new modalities. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to head the direction sometimes. Just make sure to take the fault and learn and bring it back to leadership and make sure they understand that you know, it was a mistake, and keep plowing forward, and they'll trust you just as long as you communicate it to them.
It's a great summary of how to do change management well in healthcare, as you've executed there. We have a couple of outcome stories that we wanted to share from Marshfield on the screen here. Obviously, you know, an important driver here were cost savings for your organization. We've been able to generate those for you really through aggregated buying power on behalf of our community of over 1,500 hospitals that are members of PartsSource Pro, but also through 20 years of benchmark cost data that we were able to bring to bear. We've consolidated a lot of enterprise contracts and rationalized that workflow, so you've got a single not just managed service agreement, but a single service dispatch and update method. And really, just like with our parts solution, we're very focused on building evidence-based and data-based informed decisions. And so our formulary concept applied first in parts is being applied across service management, along with the national benchmarking and vendor performance monitoring tools that we've had in place for parts here for many years, and have recently developed out for service in service contracts. Can you just talk quickly here, Jay, about your experience with the managed service contracts program with PartsSource?
I got a great story to just share to complement this. Is you know, we had our mammo service was in-house, so we really didn't get into the evolution, but we had a mammo guy of 20 plus years that we've skinny down the contracts to basically self-insured. And of course, today's environment, our mammo guy of 20 years left, and that's okay, because we have everything comes out of the biomed account, and we're basically self-insured. We'll run it time and material, and then and we'll just case by case, we'll run time and material until I can get our next biomed trained up and operational with that. The vendor implemented T's and C's, terms and conditions, for every service event that came up. I don't know how your hospitals are handling that currently, but any terms and conditions we're no longer able to sign them because of some of the commitments you can make by simply signing a term and condition for a repair, and pretty soon you're signing on for a 5-year extension on a contract. We were basically shut down with our mammo repairs because we couldn't, every time we had a service incident, we tried to run the paperwork through legal, and it was too big a delay. Well, I called PartsSource. It's like having a life preserver. You can jump in a time and material. They came up within days. We had a plan to support our mammo systems, and what's on top of that, we can get into some of the savings involved with that, but it helps us to bring our internal staff on board with the repairs. Right now, I have a guy working towards becoming efficient with repairing our mammo machines, and anytime he goes out and frontlines a piece of equipment and has a win, or at least helps troubleshoot it, that time gets pulled back off of our contract, and it makes us want to invest in our employees and help move that further along. one of the harder struggles is as soon as you make a commitment to put some sort of contract on a piece of equipment, it just kind of becomes the vendor's responsibility. We lose our investment on it. So again, that mammo example is probably just a very simple way of looking at our partnership and how we're growing that and saving money with it, and still meeting the customer needs.
It sounds like a great start. What have you found as you dug into the rest of the contract portfolio opportunities here as you look out into the future for some of the work that we're doing together?
I still have, and actually we got a meeting coming up. I got about $900,000 in contracts, those leftover contracts that are, it sounds like a lot of money, but some of these are bigger iron, but we're reviewing these contracts. Some of them are expiring. I still have another probably $4 million of contracts out there that we have to come through. Some of them, and we've done a great job with risk evaluation. Some of that stuff you can't, your robots, you can't run those at risk, and you're kind of that's just a set spend that you're going to do. There's not much you can affect with it, but the equipment that we have an opportunity for, we do a great job of reviewing it, and a great job for savings and partnering. Even if I just drop it off the manufacturer's their full service contract, I can roll it over to PartsSource, and as my guys are trained, we can start putting our time into that and still see a savings brought back in-house on both parties. PartsSource helps promote getting our guys trained, so it's a great partnership.
That's right. We recently brought RSTI under the fold of the company's ownership, and they are important partners in helping to power the labor teams at each of the organizations like yours at Marshfield. Jay, helping folks get access to mission critical training. I know an important element was not just upskilling your team, but also introducing more productivity of that group. Part of what we've worked to build with you and others around the country is really a digitally powered experience. So technology transforming the entire service experience, from dispatch to event monitoring and real-time notifications to an operational command center of all of the incoming service and parts events happening across the enterprise, along with visual analytics that people are accustomed to seeing. So great real-time push notifications that really help you manage your scarce resources effectively and bring the kind of visibility to the organization to drive continuous improvement around the things that matter: cost, quality, productivity of the organization that you're running. Here's another shot on the screen of a variety of the analytics available, again, covering cost, quality, and performance of the organizations that we're serving today. So technologies continue to be an important part of how we deliver best-in-class performance of HTM organizations, and of course, having access to benchmarks and the analytics to share with your leadership and drive additional decision making is really a key component of this program. You mentioned, Jay, really the notion that 50% cost reduction is not unreasonable, and that you're on your way to achieving that in many cases. This is a journey that a lot of our clients are on, which is in today's ecosystem, they're being tasked to do more with less, and ultimately that means finding efficiencies in the largest spend category without introducing clinical risk. The way to do that is through access to the best data, insights, technology to drive best-in-class performance and ultimately evolve to a more in-house model. Maybe just comment here as we wrap up on where you are in this journey and what it's been like to date.
I mentioned before, I'm part of a rural healthcare, which is part of a smaller system. So absolutely quality. We're looking at saving the dollars for the effect of the healthcare inflation, but the number one reason is the same equipment that we maintain touches my family, my neighbors, my friends. Our job is to provide safe first, reliable second, cost-effective equipment. You really have to embrace the automation and the partnerships with the right vendors. PartsSource has done an incredible job for us as far as giving us that I call it my life preserver, because when I make a decision, it's always nice to have that. I've made a lot of decisions in my career with contracts and negotiations, and really have never had that help or that second opinion on it. And it's been just a exciting journey. We still have a ways to go, but it's been amazing. So
that's great, Jay. Thanks for your perspective on it. And for folks that have any follow-up questions, would like to see the study white paper in more detail, would like to have a complimentary assessment of their contract portfolio to be benchmarked and understand what options are out in the market, please don't hesitate to contact us. And I'll turn it back to you, Carrie, to see if panelists have and attendees have shared any questions with us.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Settimi and Jay. Yeah, we have 3 really good questions. The first one is, with so many contracts in our system, I'm wondering how others get started.
You know, like with Jay, you know, often it is an acute issue. So there's a downed asset and you realize that the current contract construct is just not meeting needs. In other cases, it's getting into a new job and collecting those across the organization to see what you're starting with. I would say, Carrie, often we are called in really either for new leaders who are trying to get a grasp on what the art of the possible is at their organization to do a contract portfolio assessment. It's a case where a leader might be tasked with a substantial cost out in the next budgetary year, and they're having difficulty assessing what all the right entitlements, risk strategies, and cost alternatives are, and they just need someone to help project management that effort and bring them back a set of evidence-based alternatives. Or I think in Jay's case, where he was having a problem child with his mammos, and that triggered a conversation around an acute need of a contract that was expiring, but ultimately led to a much wider evaluation. And now we've evaluated and interacted with dozens of contracts for Jay, and really helped rebuild the service strategy at Marshfield at a much lower cost. And of course, Jay's been a terrific partner in driving change management, providing leadership, communication for what is required here. And we were bringing a lot of that proprietary data, technology enablement, and program and project management skills to the table. So it's actually a lot less difficult to get started than you might think. I would just say those are the 3 common use cases that we see when we interact with hospital clients.
Okay, great. Well, I really like this question. So someone said, one of the things that drives me crazy is the fire drills ahead of contracts expiring, all at different times. Will PartsSource be able to help me manage these renewals?
Yeah, it's a great question. I know, Jay, you guys have faced a huge amount of work in pulling the right data together, getting the right actors lined up and influencers and decision makers lined up. That alone is enough work, let alone managing an enterprise worth of contracts across dozens of modalities in dozens more model types. And one of the things we've really focused early on, Carrie, in our assessment process is not just going back to clients with different cost options, which of course is important in light of today's economic environment, but we also go back to provide them really a roadmap. It's a visual roadmap that identifies when and where they have contract expiry occurring over the next few periods of time. That could be quarters, it could be years, but the goal is really to show, in many cases, it's the first time our clients have seen it, a really crisp and easy to view way of how their contracts roll out here over the next number of periods, whether they have out clauses to them, whether they have natural expirations or renewals built into them. And we're providing all of that on a complimentary assessment. So it's been a huge help for clients just trying to understand, what should I focus on? What's the best priority right now? What needs my attention right away? And our job is to really bring that to folks' attention, provide them some benchmarking on how other best-in-class organizations are attacking that particular model from a service strategy perspective, and then of course showing them alternatives as it relates to just different cost efforts in the market.
Okay, great. Well, so for the last question, I really like this one too. Okay, so does the repair and service agreement solution run on the same digital platform as PartsSource Pro?
Absolutely. That was our design from the beginning, which is, having folks like Jay and his team at Marshfield be able to go online, interact, and really get whatever clinical resource that they need to keep the high uptime of their clinical assets. Our goal is to provide a very simple, source to procure option if it's parts or on-demand service. If it's a depot repair or if it's minor equipment, I simply go onto partsource.com and I can type in what I'm looking for, click and buy it. We've built in, now obviously the service contract analysis happens offline today, and we're really bringing all of that workflow online. And Jay's actually just gone live on the most recent aspects of it, which is providing, supplier visual analytics and command center views, notifications and online service dispatch request. All of that workflow is moving online, and you will see us really migrate the entire experience of service management across an enterprise, again, across what could be, prior dozens or hundreds of contracts, hundreds of vendors, and all of whom have different service dispatch, account details, details for collecting field service reports, for assessing their own performance. But we've really put all of that in one ecosystem online, and it really is transforming the way the service is getting done in this country. I know we're short on time here, Jay, but just maybe quickly, early reactions to some of the technology that we're deploying at Marshfield.
Absolutely. I had, I got probably one of the best account managers assigned to us from day one, Anthony Pinto, but I got to call him every day when I wanted details, when I had questions coming up. The dashboards are amazing. I really do appreciate I can drill down on performance, on cost, on projected savings, and on top of that, from my knowledge, I can share that with the leadership and keep that excitement about the savings and the services that we're providing to the biomed equipment. Just in a short picture, it gives you a full picture on what's going on with your contracts and your operations with PartsSource. And Anthony doesn't get those 6 o'clock at night calls from me anymore. So.
I'm sure he's disappointed about it, Jay. As always, Jay, I picked up a new Jayism in our conversation today. If you want to travel, you need a compass. And we've been really privileged to serve your organization and you on this journey. There's still lots more to do there. We're excited to partner with you on it. Thanks for taking the time today. And Carrie, thank you, and we'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, thank you both so much. I want to conclude by saying thank you to our presenters who both did a wonderful job, as well as our sponsor, PartsSource. Also, please email me at kstevens, and that's kstevens with a PH at Medcor, MEDQOR, with comments, questions, and future webinar suggestions. And be sure to visit us at www.24x7mag.com. And thank you again for participating in 24/7's webinar, HTM Insights, Longitudinal Analysis of Medical Equipment Service Contracts 2016 to 2022. Have a wonderful day.